Every year, the birthday videos get a little longer and show a little more. That is the detail nobody ever talks about directly, but it is the one worth paying attention to, because it tracks a pattern that tells you something important about how the Sussex operation thinks about children and what function they serve within it. The first Archie appearances were brief, almost to the point of invisibility. A fleeting glimpse, enough to confirm his existence to the world, deliberately restrained, almost defiant in how little was offered. Then a little more, then more still, and now, for Lilibet's birthday in 2025, a video that ran more than a minute showed her face clearly and at length, included her voice, and was released to global media with the full apparatus of a professional production decision rather than a private family moment that happened to reach the world.
The nerve of this prince, firstly to assume that he's entitled to taxpayer-funded protection. At the same time, they've been offered an invite to stay at the royal residence out of the goodness of the king's heart, yet Harry is throwing the toys out of the cot again because he assumes the taxpayer will just pay for him, Christo, even though he's no longer a working royal.
Compare that trajectory to what the original promise was, because the promise was specific and made in very specific circumstances. Harry was building a case for why they had left. The case had to be compelling enough to justify what they were asking the public to understand and accept, that they had left the most famous family in the world, had given up titles and protection and everything that came with the institution, specifically because the institution could not protect the children they wanted to have. Archie had already been born and had already been introduced to the world with the degree of visibility the Sussex operation decided at that moment was appropriate. Lilibet was coming. The argument was not abstract. My children will grow up in public if I stay. The press will circle them the way the press circled me. The cameras will find them the way cameras found Diana. And I cannot allow that to happen to my own children when I know exactly what it does to a person. That is the argument.
Well done, Harry and Meghan, who once again have seized defeat from the jaws of victory.
It was made clearly, repeatedly, in multiple formats for a large global audience. And it was the argument that most people who felt sympathy for the Sussex exit found most understandable and most genuinely affecting. A father trying to protect his children from the specific harm he knew, because he had lived it, and because his mother had not survived it. Harry's most specific public articulation of this connects the decision directly to Diana, and I want to spend a moment with that connection because I think it is the most important thread in the whole story.
If you don't want to be part of something, which is your right, the reason you're so unpopular, you couple of chumps, is that you then go away, sign any and every deal which goes against your desire for privacy to sell secrets about the very organisation you apparently want nothing to do. And then when you realise you're out in the cold and you need to start ingratiating yourself, you then want the same benefits, but you're not doing the hard jobs. That doesn't work in any walk of life, Kins, does it?
He talks about Diana in a way that positions her story as the cautionary tale his entire subsequent life has been shaped around. The exposure, the cameras, the way being public property from birth meant she never had the interior life that might have given her somewhere to stand when everything was falling apart. That is the reading he has offered publicly in the memoir, in interviews, in the documentary. And it is a reading that, if you take it seriously, should have produced children growing up as privately as possible, specifically because their father understood from personal experience what the alternative leads to.
Sorry, but do you know what irritates me about this story is the fact that what does he think will happen if he's in a royal residence? What does he think will happen if he's in a royal residence with the king? Does he think that the king's securities are going to leave all the doors and windows open or put a flag outside saying, come in? Of course he's going to be protected. He's going to be in a royal residence. He's going to be with His Majesty the King. I imagine there'll be a few protection officers around. I imagine, if he's lucky, they'll even send a car to the airport to pick him up. So what does he actually want? What more does he actually want?
Stay with me, because the birthday video and the Netflix content land very differently once you have this framework clearly in mind. Angela Levin has an answer to that question, and her answer is worth taking seriously not just because she has spent more time studying Harry and Meghan closely than almost any other journalist alive, including more time than most people have spent with Harry personally, in research contexts, but because she describes the mechanism specifically rather than just pointing at the outcome and saying it looks bad. Her argument is that Meghan introduces the children to the audience strategically, When something in the Sussex operation needs rescuing, when coverage has been unflattering, when the brand momentum has stalled, and something warmer and more human is needed to change the conversation.
They want all the privileges of being senior royals without accepting the reality that they walked away from that role. They quit their jobs.
And I'm so with
She brings them out, calibrated to what the brand needs at that specific moment. A voice here, a clear face there, a minute of birthday video when a minute of birthday video is what the moment calls for, and not more than a minute when more than a minute would feel like too much. And she withdraws access again when the immediate purpose has been served, until the next time something needs rescuing. The children are not integrated as a permanent fixture in the public persona, which would at least be a consistent position, even if critics disagreed with it, but deployed selectively, which is a different thing, and the deployment is responsive to what the brand needs rather than to anything that has to do with the children themselves or their own relationship to being visible. The birthday video timing in this reading is not incidental. Look at where it arrives in the broader commercial picture.
Now, up till this point, Harry has shamelessly leveraged and weaponized access to Archie and Lily in order to get his armed royal protection. Well, Harry now, like a spoiled toddler, has thrown his toys out of the pram when discovering that you are not going to get your armed bodyguard.
Netflix underperforming significantly, falling to a ranking of 383 among global titles, below a children's animated show about a bear, which is a specific kind of benchmark. The podcast falling off the charts entirely, the as-ever brand watching its traffic contract, the UK visit collapsing before it happened, and generating the kind of coverage that positioned Harry as a man negotiating from weakness rather than strength. Into that environment, a birthday video for Lilibet, warmly received, widely shared, generating international coverage that positions the family as loving and happy and normal, does real commercial work. It shifts the conversation. It reminds the audience that there are children and a family and something genuine at the center of all this, rather than just a contracting brand and a series of disappointed commercial partners. The children are not the product, strictly speaking, but they are the emotional engine that makes the product land differently in the moments when the audience has started to feel skeptical, and the timing of when they appear and disappear from public view maps quite closely onto when the brand needs that emotional engine and when it does not need it anymore. Hold that thought for a moment, because I want to come back to Harry's stated position on all of this. And I want to do it carefully, because the stated position is specific, and it matters that it is specific.
They last had a private meeting, which was at Prince Philip's funeral. It ended up as the forward in Spare, the book. When the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth, died, we literally got details of how he went into her bedroom and sat with her, things that I don't think that the late Queen would have wanted in the public domain. So there's always that risk when he sees his family that it's going to end up being monetized somehow. And I just think that that's incredibly vulgar.
The like button keeps this channel going, and it costs nothing. Hit it and come straight back, because the next part is the part I think deserves the most attention. Harry's most specific public articulation of why he left the royal family connects the decision directly to his children's privacy. He has said, in Spare, in interviews, in the Netflix documentary, that he did not want Archie and Lilibet to grow up the way he grew up. He did not want them to be defined by their royal identity before they were old enough to understand what that meant. He did not want cameras finding them in private moments. He did not want their childhood to be content. He left, by his own account, primarily to give them something he did not have. And Diana is the shadow behind all of it. Harry talks about Diana in a specific way when he talks about childhood and privacy and what cameras do to people who are watched from the moment they are born. He talks about the toll it took on her, the way the exposure accelerated something that became impossible to contain, the way being public property from the beginning meant she never had the private interior life that might have given her somewhere to stand when everything else was collapsing. That is the reading he has offered publicly, and it is the reading that makes his stated reason for leaving feel genuinely felt rather than constructed, which is exactly what makes the birthday video so jarring to look at, and why it is jarring in a specific and uncomfortable way rather than just being another example of the Sussex operation doing something contradictory. Because a professionally produced video of your 3-year-old daughter, released to international media with deliberate timing on a specific date to maximize coverage, watched by millions of people on a global platform, is not protecting her from the fate you described fearing for her. It is choosing that fate for her. The difference between what Diana's public exposure did to Diana and what this birthday video is doing to Lilibet is one of degree and control. Meghan and Harry control the framing and the timing, whereas Diana did not. But the underlying choice to make a child's life into public content that serves the parents' commercial operation is the same choice, dressed in very different clothes and very different language, made by people who have spent years explaining clearly and specifically to the world why they would never make it.
Guess what? The British taxpayer doesn't fancy paying for their security. Apparently, the spoiled brat, the Duke of Sussex, may well throw his toys out of the pram once again. After announcing his visit to the UK, the Prince later learned that his family will not receive police protection.
Now let's look at the Netflix content more closely, because with Love Meghan and Without Walls and the additional material being produced around the lifestyle brand raises questions that go beyond just the birthday videos and into how the whole framework around the children has been constructed and whether that framework is actually protective or whether it just frames the exposure in language that makes it sound protective. Netflix Without Walls is positioned as a behind-the-scenes series that gives the viewer intimate access to the brand launch and the people behind it, specifically including the domestic life that is supposed to authenticate the products on offer. The emotional logic is, the jam is made by someone you feel you know, in a kitchen that looks like your own but better, by a family that seems like one you would want to be part of. The children's appearances in this context are not quite the same as a birthday tribute. They are integrated into a lifestyle narrative in a way that makes them part of the product offering, which is to say part of the reason people buy the jam, or the candles, or whatever comes next. Critics have argued that the Netflix material represents the most visible breakdown of Harry's stated principle, and I think they are right that it is the most visible. But I also think there is a more interesting tension underneath the visibility, which is this. Harry's argument for leaving was specifically about leaving an institution that would have put his children in front of cameras and made them into public figures before they could consent to it. He said explicitly that the British royal family and the British press together constituted a system he could not protect his children inside. And what has replaced that system is Netflix, a global streaming platform with hundreds of millions of subscribers, with a financial relationship that has involved multiple millions of dollars, where his children appear in lifestyle content alongside product launches and brand stories that are specifically designed to feel like access to a private life rather than what they are, which is commercial content. That is not protection from cameras. That is a different and arguably more commercially calculated version of the same exposure, operated by the same parents rather than by an institution, and dressed in the language of authenticity rather than royal duty. The institution he left had its own rules about children and cameras. William and Catherine have kept their children essentially private within the context of royal public life. Occasional appearances at significant events, school photographs shared once a year that are specifically designed to be humanizing without being invasive, birthday portraits that show very little and protect a great deal of the ordinary domestic life. George is 12 years old and has not given a television interview and has not appeared in any content produced for a commercial platform. Charlotte and Louis are similarly protected from that kind of visibility. During Catherine's cancer treatment, when the public speculation and the misinformation were at their most intense, when a video of normal family life would have done enormous work to quiet the conspiratorial coverage she was receiving, she specifically chose not to share footage of her children as evidence or as reassurance. She decided that their privacy mattered more than managing the public narrative about her health, which is the kind of decision that is easy to describe as principled and considerably harder to actually make when the cameras are outside and the stories are running. Put that directly next to Archie at 6 and Lilibet at 3 appearing in Netflix documentary content in a lifestyle series with an explicit commercial purpose to an audience of hundreds of millions of people across more than 190 countries. The protection Harry said he was building around his children, the private life that was the stated reason for the departure and the sacrifice and the years of family estrangement, is, in practice, measurably and demonstrably less protective than the royal family he said he left to get away from. William and Catherine's approach to their children's privacy is more protective than the approach Harry described when he explained why he left the institution William and Catherine are part of. Now, I want to be fair about this, because the point is not that Harry and Meghan are bad parents, or that Archie and Lilibet are being harmed in any obvious or immediate sense. Children growing up in public life in a controlled environment with parents who love them is not automatically damaging, and I think the desire to frame it that way underestimates the complexity of how families manage visibility. The point is specifically about the consistency between what was said and what is happening, and about what the gap between those two things tells you about whether the stated reasons for leaving were the real reasons or whether they were a more sympathetic framing of what was in fact a primarily commercial decision. If the decision to leave was about protecting the children from public life, the children should be living private lives. If the decision was actually about wanting to build a commercial operation outside the constraints of the royal family, the children appearing in Netflix content makes perfect sense. The birthday video and everything around it does not answer that question definitively, but it moves the needle. It is evidence in the argument, and the argument it is evidence for is not the one Harry has been making publicly. Angela Levin's position is direct, and it is the sharpest version of this argument. The children are being used as a commercial asset, and the people making that decision know that Harry's stated principles make it look exactly as contradictory as it is, which is precisely why the framing around every birthday video and every Netflix appearance emphasizes warmth and love and family first. The emotional packaging makes the commercial reality harder to see, which is exactly why the packaging is so careful and so consistent across every piece of content the children appear in. You do not lead with, "This will help our brand." You lead with birthday, balloons, a child laughing. The commercial work gets done in the background, out of the frame. Whatever else you think about the Sussex operation, that is a sophisticated understanding of how to make something look like one thing while it is functionally another. It requires reading the audience correctly, understanding that people want to feel the warmth rather than see the calculation, that as long as the warmth is convincingly rendered, the calculation underneath it can remain invisible to most viewers. The children appear because they make the brand work better. The love is almost certainly real. I have no reason to doubt Harry and Meghan love their children deeply. But the decision to share that love with a global audience on a commercial platform, on a schedule that correlates with commercial need, is still a commercial decision regardless of the genuine emotion that exists within it. Now, I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier and push it further, because I think it is the most important frame in this whole conversation, and it does not get applied directly enough in most of the coverage of these stories. The argument Harry made for leaving was not just that he wanted a private life for his children, it was that he wanted a specific contrast, his children's private life, as against his own public childhood, as against Diana's destroyed private self. That is the emotional core of the Spare narrative, of the documentary, of every interview he has given in which he connects his decision to leave to the experience of growing up watched. My mother was consumed by the exposure. I was shaped by it in ways I am still recovering from. My children will not experience it. The Diana parallel is the most powerful argument in the Sussex canon precisely because it is the most personal and the least easily countered. It does not require anyone to agree about whether the institution was racist, or whether the press was unfair, or whether the security argument is legitimate. It just requires accepting that a son who watched his mother die young, in circumstances that public exposure contributed to, might genuinely want to protect his own children from the kind of life that contributed to that outcome. Most people find that argument emotionally irresistible. Most people who gave Harry the benefit of the doubt when they heard it did so because this particular piece of his case felt true in a way that some of the other pieces felt constructed, which is exactly why the birthday video, and the Netflix content, and Without Walls, and the escalating visibility of two children who are getting younger by the year while the content about them gets longer and more commercial, lands so specifically. It is not just a contradiction of a stated principle. It is a contradiction of the principle that most people found most genuine, most personal, most connected to genuine loss and genuine fear. The one that made them say, yes, regardless of everything else, regardless of the titles and the security disputes and the commercial deals and the contradictions, I understand why he left. If Harry's principle about protecting his children from cameras was the part that was real, the genuine kernel inside all the other noise, it should still be operating visibly in his behavior rather than appearing only in his words. If it is not operating, then either the circumstances have changed it in ways he has not explained publicly, which is possible and which he should address, or it was never quite what it appeared to be when it was most useful as an argument, which is the conclusion the current situation is making progressively harder to avoid. What there is instead, as far as the public record shows, is more content and more children and a trajectory that is moving in one direction and has been moving in that direction since the very first carefully restricted glimpse of Archie as a newborn. More visibility, not less. More deployment, not withdrawal. More minutes of birthday video, not fewer. More Netflix series, not a step back from the platform. And the explanation that Angela Levin and others have offered for why that is, that Harry's stated principles are operating within a household where those principles keep getting overridden for commercial reasons, and that Harry is either unable or unwilling to prevent that from happening publicly, is the uncomfortable reading. But it is the one the evidence supports. Here is what I keep thinking about, and this is where I want to end, because it is the part of this story that extends furthest beyond the current news cycle. Archie is 6 years old. Lilibet is 3 years old. They are far too young to understand what a Netflix documentary is, or what a birthday video going out to millions of people means, or what the commercial relationship between their family and a streaming platform involves. They are too young to have an opinion about whether they want to be visible or not. They absorb the version of reality they are given. They are shaped by the environment they are raised in. They are forming their understanding of what is private and what is public based on the choices being made around them, and the environment they are being raised in involves being content for a global streaming platform with hundreds of millions of subscribers. In a few years, they will be old enough to have genuine opinions about visibility and privacy and whether they want to be visible or not. In a few more years, they will be old enough to understand what those videos were doing commercially and what the timing of them corresponded to. And at some point beyond that, they will be old enough to find everything that has been written and said and filmed and form their own view of the gap between what their father said about protecting them and what actually happened. That is not a criticism of how much Harry and Meghan love their children, or an argument that they are bad parents. I assume they love their children enormously. It is an observation about what those future conversations might contain, and about whether the private childhood Harry said he was giving his children will look to the children themselves when they are old enough to assess it, like what he described when he was using it to explain why he left. What do you make of this? Does the pattern Angela Levin is describing fit what you see in the birthday video timing and the Netflix content, or do you think the commercial reading is being over-applied to decisions that are genuinely about a family sharing their life? Drop it in the comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one.